Hey, happy Valentine's Day. I had completely forgotten that Netflix was going to drop a teaser for Queen Charlotte, the Bridgerton spinoff today, and so I thought we could watch it together. I haven't watched it yet. Now, admittedly, I have had some reservations about this prequel, and I will speak to those reservations potentially more in depth afterwards, but it kind of relates back to both the history and then the elimination of some of the suspension of disbelief, and that what drew me to this series in the first place was that it was based on this romance series that I loved, and seeing that kind of romance series structure adapted to the screen for the first time. And so here we are kind of leaving all of that behind, which is art in and of itself, but it is a much different story, and a story that we know doesn't have a happy ending in the same way that Bridgerton does. And I believe the Tudum article that came out today kind of posited this idea that Rhimes is interested in exploring what different variations of a happy ending means. But knowing the limited history that I do of Queen Charlotte, and that is part of my reservation as well, it's not a happy ending in the way we would traditionally think of it. And part of the wonderful escapism of Bridgerton is that promise of that happily ever after at the end, part of the wonderful escapism of romance as a genre in general. So this is admittedly outside of my kind of base of existing knowledge, whether it be from history or the books, and as a dramaturg who likes to go in with lots of information often for things like this, or when I'm speaking on things like this, that makes me a little hesitant. But let's jump in and see what we think, because if nothing else, this era of costumes is fantastic. And let me know if you're interested in me covering this more in depth come May 4th. I'm still kind of on the fence, but I know a lot of you are interested in what I have to say about Bridgerton, and I so appreciate that. I am just kind of reticent because I don't know how much I have to offer, but I will have time to study up to some extent. So let's get into it and see what we think, and then we can touch base.
Your Majesty.
Hand graze. They know we love a hand graze.
I'm George.
Okay, flashbacks. I love a flashback. Ooh.
Your marriage is the business of this country. This cannot go wrong.
You are the first of your kind. You must secure your position.
This is my home.
2 hand grazes. Belated hand grazes.
I am the queen.
Okay. Okay, so I don't know how much that really tells us about what we're walking into, other than kind of setting the palace space. I, again, do not know the history of this as in-depth as I want to, though I do have my eye on a book from the library. This looks like it's going to give us a kind of different level or view of decadence, and kind of contrast that decadence against social pressures and political pressures. And while these social pressures exist in Bridgerton, it's in a much different way. I'm loving the idea that this is going to be told via flashback, because as I love a memory play, I love a good kind of centralizing structure. And I think as a spinoff, and a spinoff without an existing kind of intellectual property around it, where there aren't existing books for this, flashback offers some grounding there, and we'll see how they operate it. And I love the idea that we'll be getting more developed stories about the matriarchs that we know and love from Bridgerton. And I think that there's something incredibly powerful in that. And of course, these actresses are all amazing, so I'm going to be glad to spend more time with them. But it comes back to this idea, I think, that this is going to be the project where the happily ever after isn't guaranteed, or isn't how we traditionally see it, as Rhimes has kind of indicated, and as the historical record has kind of indicated. Now, as I've started poking around for books about George and Charlotte and their life together, it seems like there was love in that marriage. And again, I haven't delved into the research yet, and the research about their kind of domestic life is somewhat limited. And we're kind of overshadowed by George's legacy here in terms of colonialism, and also the shadow of the decline of his mental health at the end of his life, and what that is going to bring. And this is where the kind of suspension of disbelief gets a little shaken as well. Within historical romance, it's clearly rooted in particular times and places, and there are realities of those times and places in terms of social norms and expectations, this, that, or the other. But as I've mentioned before, romance as a genre is written for the time it's being read. It's written for modern audiences. And so often these historical settings are filtered through that kind of modern lens, and kind of whatever Instagram filter of the moment you're picturing on that setting. You can see these worlds start to evolve, you can see the character types start to change and evolve based on what people are responding to most at any given moment. It is very much a reflection of the current time. Because of that, there is a certain level of suspension of disbelief and kind of fantasy to the genre as a whole, at least in how I conceptualize it. And I know that there's a fuzzy line there because there are a lot of realities that need to be grappled with in the past. And part of what has made Bridgerton so appealing is its diversity, but there has also been a lot of pushback in how it's being handled, whether it's pure escapism, whether it's grappling with the realities of racism at the time enough and colonialism at the time enough, or whether it's falling somewhere in the middle and if that is sufficient enough. And I think that there has been a lot of thought and intention put into these storylines, and I'm not saying it's always going to get it completely right, because nothing always gets it completely right, but there's a lot of magic and a lot of power in a love story in a happily ever after, and there is, like I said, a certain level of suspension of disbelief that you are going into a romance of this type with. And Bridgerton is a romance of a type that we haven't seen translated onto the screen in this way before. As I've said again and again, it is a traditional historical romance series where we move from character to character, and there are conventions that exist within that type of storytelling like there are to any type of storytelling. And some of the friction, as I've said before, that we are seeing in terms of reactions to Bridgerton often come from kind of navigating that type of storytelling and how it is going to translate to the screen, whether we can pull it off and how. And I think that we've been seeing it very successfully. And so with this project, we're going in a completely different direction. And that level of suspension of disbelief is going to be tested because there are very real historical events and things that these people have done that we have to contend with. And the historical record is no longer a backdrop, but is very much forefront. I will be very interested to hear how they're handling the historical research of this, whether there are dramaturgs involved in this production, or whether they've sought out experts. Personally, I think that it would have been really, really smart. I don't know if they're doing this. If they drop this series and then also have a Netflix original docuseries about Queen Charlotte, I think that that would have been a stellar idea. One, because I selfishly love those kind of historical docuseries, but two, because this is a story we haven't really explored much. I, like I said, admittedly don't know a whole lot of the historical record here because admittedly Tudor history has been more prominent and popular my whole life. There's some kind of salaciousness to that, and I don't mean that disrespectfully because clearly lives were ruined and history was altered by that, but in terms of history being altered too, I kind of only know this monarch through the lens of the American Revolution. So it's definitely going to open up the history, and that's going to be powerful in and of itself. But again, it's going to be a little bit more present within the historical record. Now, I guess the question becomes if it becomes something like Reign, which I've admittedly only watched a couple of episodes of, but I know that that breaks pretty hard from the historical record, but at the same time, it seems to be very well beloved and entertaining. And even when historians that I've seen talk about it, talk about how much it deviates, they also appreciate it as a show. So there's some kind of fondness there, but that history also feels a little bit more distant and isn't necessarily informing the current moment in the same way that some of this history may be. And so we'll see how that's handled. Also, it looks like the tone of this is going to be a lot more dramatic. And now we have definitely had those moments of drama with Bridgerton. We had the really deep exploration of Anthony's loss and grief, especially in season 2, but there is always that lightheartedness and that love that's surrounding everything. There is that guarantee of the happily ever after. Well, I mean, I guess it's not 100% guaranteed because they could always mess with things, but I think that if they messed with that, that would be the line. Additionally, one of the reasons Bridgerton works so well on screen is, even if I believe it's actually been tamped down a little bit, Julia Quinn's dialogue has always been quick and snappy and quippy, and that works well for the screen because that dialogue is already there. That forward momentum of how these characters are interacting is already there, so it's not just internal monologue that is driving everything. So I'll be very interested. I also believe it was reported sometime last year that Quinn and Avon, her publisher, also a part of HarperCollins, were going to release a book for this show. Now, if so, one, I haven't heard more about it. If you have, please let me know. But two, that will be a huge deviation from Quinn's work. And as someone who has been reading Quinn since I was in high school, was very excited about the Bridgerton prequels that came out even before the show was released, that's going to be a huge change. And also, if they have her write that book, this writer that I've only ever known to write traditional happily ever afters, what is the end of that book going to look like? We see the heartbreak that balances out everything for Queen Charlotte in the show, and I do think that that adds a little extra depth to everything for the screen. That being said, the visuals of this look absolutely stunning, and I'm excited to look at the fashion of this era particularly, though I have no expectations of full historical accuracy here. I know that has been kind of a point of contention for Bridgerton, but again, for me, Bridgerton has always existed in this kind of potential liminal space between reality and fantasy, so it's just been more about kind of catching the spirit of the thing. So I guess I'll be interested to see if I have a kind of similar opinion here, but I do love a good square neckline. We'll get some bustles thrown in for good measure. It'll be great fun. They also very much know what they're doing with the multiple hand graze cuts in this teaser, to the point where I'm like, okay, we get it, you're kind of ruining it now, but we'll see. It looks like the heat level here is going to be similar to Bridgerton, so that will be very interesting. And I know we're having a kind of conversation right now again about intimacy on TV, which I'm not going to even get into, but I actually appreciate it here and in other period pieces, because I think it's so easy to look at the past and kind of transpose our own version of morality or our conversations from the current moment onto the past. And sure, this is also reflecting the current moment to a degree as well, absolutely. But I think that there is power in remembering that these were people with full lives, and that includes intimacy. Now, in terms of the full lives, that brings us right back around to the historical record and how this is going to approach King George, and presenting this more personal tale will kind of humanize him in a different way, and whether it will then also ignore a lot of the political realities and what those political realities wrought, we will see. But this is very clearly Queen Charlotte's story, and so I think it is more likely that it is going to look at how all of this impacted her, and it looks like it's going to be an exploration of that claiming of power and moving from someone that things happen to someone who makes things happen. And so that is an active story that can be told, and I love that we are giving love its kind of proper moment in that, recognizing the power that love has and the fact that the personal and political are not completely divorced. So I don't know, that's where I'm sitting with this. I have some reservations in how much insight I'm really going to bring to this if I were to talk about it, but at the same time I'm still drawn to the story and potentially do want to talk about it. So I guess let me know what you're thinking, if you would be interested in me talking about this more when it comes out. We'll see where we're sitting, but thanks for hanging out and listening to my thoughts today. Leave yours below. What are you thinking of the trailer? What are you excited for? Do you have any reservations? Where's your head with all of this? And then also the reality that this means that we are probably not going to get Bridgerton season 3 until later this year. We kind of anticipated this. I think we were ready for this. Yes, it's a bummer, but I would rather them take the time to tell the story, as long as it's not going to be like years and years. This is more of a movie production schedule in my head than like a television show production schedule, where they're not up against like a network deadline. But I don't know, I'm not a part of that world, so don't listen to me there. Okay, tangent aside, leave your thoughts below. Thanks for listening to mine again. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah, bye.